The ice hit me before I finished my sentence. Cold water straight in the face, soaking my shirt in front of my wife, my daughter, and a table full of family. I didn't yell. I didn't flinch. I dabbed my face while Eric laughed and said, "Lighten up, old man. You're not relevant anymore." But what broke me wasn't the splash. It was Ellen, my daughter, staring down at her plate and saying nothing. I didn't just lose dignity. I lost my voice in my own home. What Eric didn't know was that was the moment I stopped trying to earn respect and started building a case. At dinner, my son-in-law threw water in my face, but everyone froze when I stood up because they had no idea what was coming. My name is Walter Whitaker and I'm 75 years old. After running my hardware store for 25 years and building a life with my wife Marion for 49, I thought I'd earned my place at the head of our family table. The oak dining room still holds the same warmth it did when our children were young. My daughter Ellen married Eric Preston last spring, a realtor with ambition in his smile and ice in his eyes. Something in the way he carries himself sets my teeth on edge, but I keep my own counsel, just as I kept those old store ledgers precise. My friend Frank Matthews, my retired accountant, taught me well about patience and paper trails. Tonight's birthday dinner should be simple enough. I smoothed the napkin across my lap, breathing in the scent of beeswax candles. But let me start from the beginning. The family filtered in around 6, settling into their usual spots at my dining room table. Ellen, my daughter, sat to my left, and Eric claimed his place to my right, lounging in the chair like it was his personal throne. Marion had outdone herself with the meal. Pot roast, and those baby potatoes I've loved since before our kids were born. You know the kind I mean? The ones that soak up the gravy just right. The wine was poured, plates were filled, and conversation drifted between work stories and neighborhood gossip. I let the familiar rhythm of family dinner wash over me, trying to ignore how Eric dominated every exchange with tales of his latest real estate conquests. "Another closing next week," he announced, cutting through someone else's story about the Andersons' new fence. "Biggest deal of the quarter. You should see the commission check heading my way." I caught Marion's eye across the table, saw her slight head shake. "Let it go," her look said. And I did, same as I had 100 times before. When the main course was winding down, I lifted my water glass. The crystal caught the light from our old chandelier, the one Marion and I bought at that antique shop in Vermont 30 years ago. The facets scattered little rainbows across the tablecloth. "I'd like to say something, if you'll humor an old man for a minute." The table quieted, faces turning toward me, all except Eric's. His attention stayed fixed on his phone beneath the table edge. 75 years is a long time to collect memories. 25 of those years I spent behind the counter at Whitaker's Hardware, watching this town grow alongside my own family. 49 amazing years with my Marion. The corner of Eric's mouth twitched up, and something in that smirk made my words catch. But I pressed on, determined to finish with dignity, teaching our children about honest work and respect. The water hit me like a slap. Eric's glass emptied across the table, soaking my shirt, dripping down my face. For a moment I couldn't breathe through the shock of it. Silence crashed down. Ellen's fork stopped halfway to her mouth, her eyes fixed on her plate. Marion's spine went rigid, her hands clenched white around her napkin. The clock on the mantel ticked 5 heavy beats before anyone moved. I reached for my napkin with deliberate care, dabbing at my face while water trickled down my collar. "That," I said quietly, "was uncalled for." Eric's laugh cut through the tension like a hacksaw. "Oh, come on, Walt, it's just a little joke. You've got to learn to lighten up if you want to stay relevant these days." My shirt clung cold against my chest. I could feel every drop working its way down, each one a fresh reminder of the disrespect. "In my home," I said, measuring each word. "At my table I expect basic courtesy." "Basic courtesy?" Eric's grin widened. "What is this, 1950? The world's moved on from all that stuffy formality." "Right, Ellen." My daughter's shoulders hunched slightly, but she didn't answer, didn't even look up. I set my napkin down carefully, aligned perfectly with my plate edge. The room felt brittle, like one wrong move might shatter everything. Every face at the table told its own story. Marion's quiet distress, Ellen's shame, the uncomfortable shifts of other family members who wished they were anywhere else. But Eric just sat there, radiating satisfaction, like he'd cleverly proven some point about generational differences, like he'd won something. I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then, keeping my voice level, I asked him, "What made you think I would laugh?" Nobody touched the chocolate cake Marion had made, my favorite, the one with that coffee frosting she's perfected over 5 decades of birthdays. The plates clinked softly as she gathered them, each sound echoing like an accusation in the strained quiet. You ever notice how tension changes the acoustics of a room? Makes every little noise feel meaningful. Eric had moved on to holding court about his latest development project, gesturing with his coffee cup like a conductor with a baton. We're talking prime real estate here. 3 blocks of downtown property ready for complete renovation. You're looking at the beginning of an empire. Ellen hung on his every word, her hand wrapped around his arm like she was afraid he might float away. The pride in her eyes when she looked at him twisted something in my gut. I'd seen that same expression decades ago, reflected in store windows while she rode on my shoulders, pointing at Christmas displays. Marion's hand found my knee under the table. "Let it go tonight," she whispered. "Please, Walter, for Ellen's sake." I covered her hand with mine, feeling the familiar warmth of her wedding ring against my palm. What could I say? That our son-in-law had just showed his true colors in front of everyone. That the water dripping from my collar felt like more than just a casual insult. The family trickled out slowly, murmuring awkward goodbyes. Some avoided my eyes, others gave me those sympathetic looks that cut deeper than any splash of water. I stayed in my chair, watching the candles burn lower, listening to the grandfather clock-mark time with its steady heartbeat. Close to midnight, I heard Eric's voice drift in through the screen door. He must have stepped onto the front porch for a phone call, probably thinking everyone else had gone to bed. But I've always been a light sleeper. Comes from decades of watching inventory and balancing books late into the night. "Yeah, man, it went perfectly." His laugh carried clear as a bell. "Old-timer won't be a problem anymore." You should have seen his face when I shut him down. Complete loss of control. I moved closer to the door, staying in the shadows of our darkened hallway. The porch light's hum nearly masked his next words, but not quite. "Listen, I've got it all worked out. Ellen's got great credit, squeaky clean. We'll paper the loans through her, move the collateral before the quarterly review. By the time anyone catches on..." He paused, chuckling. "Besides, who's going to believe some complaints from a retired hardware guy? Trust me, it's bulletproof." The floor seemed to tilt under my feet. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out whatever else he was saying. That splash of water wasn't just some young hotshot trying to embarrass his father-in-law. It was a declaration, a statement that I was too old, too irrelevant to stand in his way, while he used my daughter as a human shield for his schemes. I backed away from the door, moving on instinct toward my study. The small leather notebook I've carried for 40 years sat in its usual spot on my desk. My hands shook slightly as I opened it, but my writing was steady as I noted down the date, the time, every word I'd overheard. The bank's name went next, First Metro Trust, where Ellen kept her accounts. I drew a circle around it, then added Frank's number below. My old accountant might be retired too, but his mind was sharp as ever. And more importantly, he still had friends in the financial district. This wasn't about a ruined birthday anymore. This wasn't even about respect. This was about protecting my daughter from a predator who'd married her for her credit score. I underlined 3 words at the bottom of the page: "Protect Ellen first." In the quiet of my study, surrounded by decades of organized ledgers and careful records, I whispered to the empty room, "You chose the wrong man to underestimate." I've always believed in starting early. 25 years of opening my hardware store at 7 a.m. sharp taught me that the morning brings clarity. So by 8 the next day, I was walking into First Metro Trust, my leather shoes clicking against the polished floor like I belonged there. You know that artificial warmth bank people put on? The young clerk had it down pat, all smiles and, "How can I help you today, sir?" while her eyes stayed careful. I matched her politeness, explaining I wanted to review some publicly available documents about their loan review processes. "Of course, Mr. Whitaker, though most of that information is available online these days." She gestured at a wall of brochures. "But feel free to take any of these home." I thanked her and pretended to browse. Truth is, I'd spotted something more useful. Their bulletin board had a notice about quarterly reviews posted. September 30th deadline in bold red letters. That gave me just under 60 days. While I was there, I asked about requesting historical statements. Just testing the waters, you understand. Oh, those would need to come from the account holder directly, she said, that professional smile never wavering. Privacy regulations. Back home, I headed straight for my office. Ellen had always been organized, learned it from her mother, and we'd kept copies of her important papers ever since she opened her first account. The drawer where we filed them was right where it had always been, but something felt off. The folder was thinner than I remembered. Bank statements from the last 3 months were missing. The loan paperwork I knew she'd shown us when she bought her car 2 years ago, gone. Marion found me still going through the files. "Walter, please, you're making something out of nothing." She put her hand on my shoulder, the way she always did when trying to calm me down. "Eric just plays rough sometimes. He doesn't mean anything by it. This isn't about the water, Marion." I held up the thinned-out folder. "Someone's been in here. Or maybe Ellen took her papers home. Where they belong," she sighed. "Don't poison their marriage with suspicion." The phone rang before I could answer. Ellen's number lit up the display. "Dad?" Her voice had that forced patience I remembered from her teenage years. "Mom says you're upset about last night. Eric was just joking around. You're overreacting." Overreacting. The exact word Eric had used. I noted it down in my book right under the time and date of the call. "Ellen, honey, there are some papers missing from—" "Dad, stop. Just stop." She cut me off. "Eric's building something amazing. He knows what he's doing. Why can't you be happy for us?" After she hung up, I sat there rolling her words around in my mind. The defensiveness, the deflection, the way she'd shut down any mention of paperwork. Classic stonewalling. I'd seen it enough times from suppliers trying to hide supply chain problems. I got up to check the cabinet one more time. The space where those statements should have been seemed to mock me. Then I noticed something else. The drawer didn't glide as smoothly as it should. Someone had closed it too quickly, knocked it slightly off its track. Someone who didn't know about the little catch that needed adjusting when that happened. Someone who wasn't me. Standing there looking at that drawer, I felt the full weight of what I was up against. Eric wasn't just covering his tracks, he was isolating me, making me look like a bitter old man who couldn't handle retirement. And he was using my own family to do it. I ran my fingers along the empty folder tabs. Each one represented a piece of evidence I needed, but couldn't reach. Not through normal channels, anyway. Looking at my watch, the same Timex I'd worn while building my business, I decided some problems required after-hours solutions. Tonight, I'd start widening my search. The truth had to leave tracks somewhere. The doorbell rang, just past 8. I wasn't expecting anyone. Marion had gone to her sister's for the evening, probably to avoid another discussion about Eric. But there stood Frank Davies, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the porch light, that careful smile I remembered from 20 years of tax seasons. "Evening, Walt." He adjusted the leather portfolio under his arm. "Mind if I come in?" Margaret mentioned she saw Marion at the grocery store, said something seemed off. Small towns. You know how word travels. I stepped back to let him in, grateful for the familiar click of his dress shoes on the hardwood. Reminded me of all those April 15ths when he'd walk into my hardware store, ready to make sense of my year's receipts. "Coffee?" I asked, already heading for the kitchen. "Still take it black?" Some habits don't change. Frank settled into my living room armchair, the same spot where he'd sat when I first talked about selling the store. "What's going on, Walt?" I filled 2 mugs and brought them over. The coffee's steam carried that same Maxwell House aroma that had fueled countless late-night inventory counts. "It's about Ellen's husband, Eric." Frank listened without interruption as I laid it all out. The birthday joke, the phone conversation I'd overheard, the missing papers. His expression stayed neutral, but his fingers drummed once on the portfolio when I mentioned the loans. "Which banks are we talking about?" he asked, pulling out a legal pad. "And what kind of accounts does Ellen typically maintain?" I listed everything I knew. Her main checking at First Regional, the mortgage at United Western, credit cards at 3 different institutions. Frank's pen moved steadily, creating one of those neat columns I'd always envied. "Let me show you something." I went to my office and came back with a box of old shop records. Eric thinks I'm just some doddering old man who can't keep up. But look at this. I spread out 25 years of meticulous bookkeeping, check registers reconciled to the penny, receipts notarized and filed by date, vendor contracts with signature cards attached. "Remember how we used to handle large equipment purchases?" I asked, pointing to a particular section. Frank nodded, a slight smile forming. Triple verification. Bank statement, cancelled check and notarized delivery receipt. Made my job easier every tax season. He studied the documents for a moment, then started sketching out a new list. Okay, here's what we can legally access. Public records first. Property transactions, tax liens, UCC filings. Then bank statements where you're still listed as having account access. Digital records leave timestamps. We'll check those against NEE. Suspicious signature dates. Eric won't make it easy, I warned. He's already removed papers. And if he realizes we're looking, then we move carefully. Frank tore off the list and folded it precisely. I'll start background checks tomorrow morning. Meet me at 7, my office, not yours. Bring any power of attorney documents you might have and Ellen's original signature cards if you can find them. Relief loosened the knot in my chest. This was what I'd needed. Not just an ally, but someone who understood the paper trail, who knew how to follow money's footprints without raising alarms. Thanks, Frank. I walked him to the door. I owe you. You don't owe me anything. He patted his pocket where he'd stored the notes. Just doing what should have been done when he first showed up with those investment opportunities. We shook hands on the porch, and I watched him head to his car. The streetlight caught his silver hair. When had we both gotten so grey? But his walk was still straight, still purposeful. Like mine. A pair of headlights swept past, just as Frank pulled away. They slowed at the corner, hovering there longer than normal. I stepped back into the shadow of my doorway, counting seconds. 5, 10, 15. Whoever it was sat there watching, their brake lights glowing like red eyes in the dark. Finally, they moved on. But that deliberate pause felt like a message. Someone had noticed Frank's visit. Someone was paying attention. Frank showed up at 7 sharp the next morning, just like he promised. He was carrying his old leather briefcase, the same one he'd used for tax seasons back at the store, plus a compact scanner that looked new enough to still have its manual. Morning, Walt. He set everything on my dining room table, the same spot where Eric had pulled his water stunt. Got your coffee ready? We've got work to do. I handed him a steaming mug. Been up since 5, actually. Found those signature cards you mentioned. Perfect. He laid out a sequence of forms, each one tagged with colored sticky notes. We're going to do this by the book. First, we get copies of all bank correspondence where you're still listed. Then we set up credit monitoring. Perfectly legal since you're immediate. Family. After that, we audit every notarized document from the past year. You know what's funny? Watching Frank work reminded me of when he used to audit my hardware store books. Same methodical approach, same quiet focus. Only this time, we weren't tracking inventory, we were tracking something far more precious. Here, I spread out the archived invoices I'd kept from when Ellen helped manage the store's accounts. These all have her authentic signature. She handled vendor payments every summer while she was in college. Frank nodded, carefully scanning each document. Good thinking. We'll need these for comparison. We drove separately to First Regional, where I'd already called ahead for an appointment. The branch manager, young guy couldn't have been more than 35, seemed eager to help, right up until Frank started asking specific questions about transaction dates. Of course, we can release any notices where Mr. Whitaker is listed as an authorized party, he said, shuffling through his terminal. Within compliance guidelines, naturally. I watched the dates pop up on his screen. They clustered around Eric's latest investment opportunities. 3 properties I'd heard him bragging about at family dinners. But something about the loan numbers made my stomach tighten. They mirrored exactly against Ellen's credit. Profile limits. Frank saw it too. His pen stopped moving. Back at my house, he overlaid the signatures we'd collected against Ellen's known samples. Look here, he said, pointing to subtle differences. See the pressure points, the spacing between letters. These signatures don't match her natural hand. A chill worked its way up my spine. This wasn't just Eric being reckless with my daughter's credit. This was something deliberate, something criminal. We need to go back, I said. Talk to that manager again. Frank held up a hand. Carefully, Walt. We only bring what's legally obtained, what's public domain. Let the bank find the rest during their review. Smart man, Frank. Always was. The branch manager welcomed us back, though his smile seemed a bit strained this time. As I mentioned earlier, we conduct routine reviews of all significant credit lines. It's standard procedure. And when is the next review cycle? Frank asked casually. The manager checked his calendar. The next general portfolio review begins in 60 days. Frank nodded slightly. Thank you. That's very helpful. I wrote it down in my notebook. 60-day review. Underlined it twice. That was our window. 2 months to build our case before the bank's own process either confirmed what we suspected or cleared Eric's paper trail. As I closed my notebook, I heard a door click somewhere behind us. Probably just another customer entering the bank. But it reminded me that we weren't the only ones paying attention to details. Frank gathered our documents, keeping his expression neutral. Time to go, Walt. We've got what we need for now. He was right. We had our timeline now. 60 days to protect my daughter's future. 60 days to expose whatever Eric had been building behind that arrogant smile of his. A soft click of a door and footsteps fading away. Just another morning at the bank. But everything had changed. The clock was ticking. That afternoon, I pulled into Eric's driveway, noticing how the fresh-laid concrete already showed hairline cracks. Funny how details catch your eye when you're stalling. You ever do that? Notice little things to avoid the big moment. The garage door was open, and there he was, bent over a folding table, scattered with contractor plans. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, casting shadow lines across blueprints and permit applications. The air smelled of new lumber and that artificial pine air freshener he always used, trying to mask the musty undertone of rushed construction, I figured. Well, if it isn't my favorite father-in-law, Eric said without looking up. Come to check on my empire? I stepped inside, feeling the temperature drop. 10 degrees. Made me think of my old shop's stockroom, where I'd cool off after difficult customers. But this wasn't about losing my temper. This was about protecting Ellen. Got something you might want to see. I pulled out the photocopy Frank and I had prepared, placed it next to one of Ellen's authentic signatures from the hardware store days. Notice anything interesting? Eric barely glanced at them. Other than you wasting my time. He rolled up a blueprint with careful precision. You know what your problem is, Walt. You can't stand that Ellen married someone who actually knows how to make real money. The signatures don't match, Eric. He laughed then. Not the loud, showy laugh from the dinner party, but something softer, more dangerous. A washed-up old man who can't even read a pen stroke thinks he's going to teach me about documents. He shook his head. That's what's wrong with your generation. You think running a little hardware store makes you some kind of business expert. The familiar heat of humiliation crept up under my collar, made me think of that water hitting my face, the silence around the dinner table, Ellen's downcast eyes. Maybe I should just walk away, spare her another argument, another round of having to choose sides. Eric must have read my hesitation. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell that expensive cologne he always wore. Let me explain something about the real world, Walt. Investors love winners. They don't care about old men's feelings or family dinners. And sometimes, he smiled that practiced smile of his. Sometimes a little joke at dinner keeps everyone honest about where they stand. I looked at the calendar pinned to his garage wall. 57 days until the bank review. 57 days of Ellen. Maybe not speaking to me if I pushed this. 57 days of Marian's quiet disappointment. The weight of it sat heavy in my chest, and for a moment, just a moment, I tasted the bitter relief quitting would bring. Then I heard Frank's voice in my head, clear as yesterday. Evidence, not outrage, Walt, that's what makes them sweat. Without another word, I slipped the photocopies back into my jacket pocket. Eric's smirk followed me as I turned toward the driveway. The garage door thundered shut behind me, probably his idea of having the last word. My phone buzzed before I reached my car. A text from Ellen. Please stop. Just 2 words, but they hit harder than any of Eric's practiced insults. I sat there in the car staring at those words until they blurred. The steering wheel felt cool under my palms, like the old metal handles on my store's front door, the ones I'd gripped every morning for 25 years, ready to face whatever the day brought. The next morning, before the sun had properly cleared the rooftops, Frank was already at my kitchen table. His reading glasses caught the dim light as he spread out papers with the careful precision I remembered from our business days. You know that focus old-school accountants get, like they're diffusing a bomb made of decimal points? Got Margaret on speaker, he said, nodding to his phone. 20 years as a notary, knows her stuff inside and out. Morning, Walt, Margaret's voice crackled through. Frank says we're building something bulletproof? I pulled out the accordion file I'd spent half the night organizing. That's the plan. The familiar scent of old paper hit me. Reminded me of late nights doing inventory, when every number had to be perfect. "Show me what you've got," Frank said, uncapping a red pen. I laid out the timeline. Ellen's authentic signatures from her college application, perfectly preserved because Marion never threw away a single milestone. Next came the mortgage papers from when Ellen bought her first house, before Eric. Then holiday checks she'd written to her cousin's kids, each one processed through banks that kept pristine records. All legally obtained, I noted, either our personal records or through proper channels. Frank nodded, making neat notations. "Margaret, we've got dated originals spanning 15 years. Can you verify chain of custody?" "Send me photos with timestamps," she replied. "I'll authenticate the sequence." While Frank photographed each document, I pulled out my old shop records. "Remember Jenny from the paint department? She handled credit applications for a decade. Says she'll sign an affidavit about Ellen's signature on store accounts." "Good," Frank murmured. "Personal witness adds weight." We worked through the morning, building our case methodically. Around 10, Frank went still, holding 3 loan addenda up to the light. "Walt," he said quietly, "look at these dates." I leaned in. The documents lined up perfectly with Eric's recent project timeline. But something was off about Ellen's signatures. The loops were too tight, the pressure points wrong. "Compare the strokes," Frank said, overlaying them with one of Ellen's authentic signatures. "See how the E starts. Real one flows smooth. These jerk at the beginning, like someone trying too hard to copy." My stomach tightened. "Those are the documents that put her credit up as collateral." Frank nodded grimly. 3 separate amendments, each expanding the liability, none of them with her actual signature. Jesus. The full weight of it hit me. Eric hadn't just been reckless with Ellen's credit. He'd forged her name to get it. Every memory of his smirking confidence took on a darker shade. Margaret's voice cut through my shock. "If you can prove those signatures are false, and they're tied to active credit lines..." "He's not just arrogant," Frank finished. "He's committed fraud." I stared at the calendar on my kitchen wall. 53 days until the bank review. Time enough for Eric to bury everything, if we weren't careful. "We need the right venue," Frank said, reading my thoughts. "Somewhere he can't slither out of." "Has to be public," I agreed. "But controlled. Family dinner," Frank suggested. "His comfort zone, where he thinks he owns the room." I thought about Eric at my birthday dinner, so sure of himself he could toss water in my face. His arrogance is his weakness. He can't resist showing off in front of family. "Exactly." Frank started writing names. "We'll need the bank manager there, your wife Ellen, Eric's parents, they're investors in his projects, right?" I nodded, seeing the trap take shape. All the people he's been playing to, the audience he can't ignore. "And everything documented," Margaret added through the speaker. "I'll notarize the full package before you serve it up." Frank circled a date on my calendar in red ink. 2 weeks out. Plenty of time to polish every detail, but soon enough that Eric wouldn't see it coming. "Time to take back your table, Walt," Frank said quietly. I touched the circled date, feeling the same calm certainty I used to get before a major inventory. When you know every number's right, you don't have to raise your voice. The next evening I stood in my dining room, adjusting the place settings with the same care I once used arranging hardware displays. You know how it is when the stakes are high, routine steadies your hands. "Everything's ready," Frank said from the doorway, holding 3 manila envelopes. Each one was thick with documents, labeled in his precise accountant's script: bank review, investor summary, and Ellen Whitaker, personal. I nodded, running through our sequence one last time. "We start civil, establish the tone, then the signature comparisons, all notarized," Frank confirmed. "Margaret added her seal this morning, followed by the loan timeline, and then I hit the phones." Frank patted his cell. "Got the branch manager's direct line, compliance hotline, and Trevor Rose from the investment group, all queued up." The plan was tight as a drum. We timed the calls to hit simultaneously, the moment the evidence landed on the table. No chance for Eric to start damage control. "Remember," Frank said quietly, "let the documents do the heavy lifting. You just need to stay steady," I finished. "Like pricing inventory or balancing books, emotion clouds the numbers." My phone buzzed. A text from Ellen. "Fine, Dad. We'll come." But please, no arguments? Before I could respond, another message popped up, Eric this time. A laughing emoji followed by, "I'll bring the fireworks." My jaw tightened, but I kept my fingers still. Let him think he's got the upper hand. I'd learned that lesson running the store. Sometimes the customer who acted the most entitled was the one you needed to watch closest at checkout. I moved to the head of the table, straightening a knife that was already perfectly aligned. The late afternoon sun caught the crystal water glass I'd set there, casting prisms on the white tablecloth. Different glass than my birthday dinner, this one was heavier, more stable. The kind that doesn't tip easily. The memory of that first splash tried to surface, but I pushed it down. Tonight wasn't about revenge. It was about protection, Ellen's future, her credit, her trust. The kind of protection I should have provided sooner if I hadn't let pride and patience blind me. Frank disappeared into the study with his envelopes while I made a final check of the dining room. The old grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner, each sound like a heartbeat. Marion had wound it just this morning. Some routines never change, crisis or not. Got the calls queued up. Frank called softly. "You're sure about the timing?" "Let him get settled first," I replied. Comfortable. Overconfident. Just like he'd been at my birthday before he decided to teach an old man about relevance. I touched the notebook in my pocket, feeling its familiar ridge. Inside were dates, amounts, signature, comparisons, each page a brick in the wall we'd built around Eric's scheme. All we had to do now was let him walk into it. The doorbell chimed. I heard Marion's steps in the hallway, the door opening, voices mixing. Ellen's hesitant greeting, Eric's louder one already playing to his audience. I took my place at the head of the table, adjusted my collar, and lifted the water glass, just to feel its weight. The clock struck 7, each chime clear and final. Footsteps crossed the threshold. Time to show Eric what respect really meant. You ever notice how a room feels different when everyone knows something's coming, but nobody's sure what? That's how my dining room felt as we settled in for dinner. The air itself seemed to be holding its breath. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice steady as I'd kept it through thousands of business transactions, especially on short notice. The familiar oak scent of the room reminded me of countless family dinners, back when trust didn't need notarized proof. Marion had outdone herself with pot roast and potatoes, comfort food for uncomfortable conversations. Ellen picked at hers while Eric dug in like a man without a care in the world. The same entitled attitude, he'd shown dumping water in my face. "Before we get too far into dinner," I said, setting my fork down carefully, "I need to share some documents, just one rule. No interruptions until I've finished the last page, fair enough?" Ellen nodded, her fingers twisting her napkin. Eric's mouth curled into that familiar smirk, the one that said he thought he was the smartest man in the room. How many customers had I seen with that same look, trying to pass bad checks at my counter? I reached beside my chair and lifted the first manila envelope. The papers inside whispered against each other as I laid them out, precise as measuring lumber. On the left, Ellen's authentic signatures from years of legitimate documents. On the right, 3 recent signatures that didn't quite match. Pressure points wrong, loops inconsistent. "These," I said, tapping the authentic ones, "are from your college applications, Ellen. Your first apartment lease, the wedding registry." Each tap punctuated the truth of her real hand. Frank sat quietly at the side table, phone ready. He'd been my accountant for 25 years. He knew timing was everything in business and justice alike. Next came the affidavits, each one bearing Margaret's crisp notary seal. "These are sworn statements from the bank's document examiners," I continued. "Note the detailed analysis of stroke patterns." Ellen's breath caught as she leaned forward, eyes widening at the obvious mismatches. Eric's smirk flickered just for a moment. "Now," I said, my voice as level as a spirit gauge, "let's walk through the timeline." I drew out the loan sequence documents, starting with this addendum from March 3rd. "Ellen, did you sign this?" She reached for the paper, but Eric's hand shot out first. "Now wait just a... Remember the rule." I cut in, calm but firm. No interruptions, just like handling difficult customers. "Stay professional, keep control." I nodded to Frank, who pressed a button on his phone. The soft beep of a conference line filled the room as he sent the complete evidence package to the pre-arranged addresses. "What's happening?" Ellen whispered, but I held up a steady hand. The hold music clicked through the speaker, some bland jazz piece that seemed absurd against the tension in the room. Eric's face had lost its smirk entirely now, replaced by something closer to calculation. After 3 rings, a crisp voice answered. "This is Brandon Martinez, Compliance Supervisor. I have your case flagged for immediate review." "Good evening," I replied, speaking clearly toward the phone. "Walter Whitaker here. Reference numbers 47193 and 47201. "Yes, Mr. Whitaker. I'm seeing the documentation coming through now." Papers shuffled on his end. "I'll need to place everyone on a brief hold while we initiate standard protective actions. Please stay on the line." The hold music returned, but nobody was listening to it. Ellen stared at the signature comparisons, one hand pressed to her mouth. Eric's jaw worked silently, his eyes darting between the papers and the phone like a man watching 2 traps close at once. I picked up my water glass, steady, controlled, and took a small sip. The weight of it felt right in my hand, solid as justice. The hold music cut out mid-note. "Mr. Whitaker, are all parties still present?" Brandon's voice carried the crisp authority of someone about to change lives. "Yes, we're here," I answered, watching Eric's face like I used to watch shoplifters near my register. "Based on the evidence package submitted and our preliminary review, we are initiating an immediate freeze on all associated accounts pending full investigation. Our forensics team has flagged multiple signature irregularities that require resolution." The words landed like hammer blows. Eric's face went from flushed to ash gray in seconds. You know that moment when someone realizes they've lost everything? I'd seen it before, usually when a contractor's check bounced and their whole house of cards came tumbling down. "Furthermore," Brandon continued, "all collateral arrangements involving Ms. Ellen Whitaker's credit lines are suspended. We've documented concerning patterns in recent property-backed loan modifications." Ellen's hand flew to her mouth, eyes wide as saucers. The pot roast sat forgotten, getting cold just like Eric's empire. Frank spoke up from his corner, calm as ever. Confirming receipt of reference numbers, he read back a string of digits, each one another nail in Eric's coffin. I watched my old friend check boxes on his legal pad, steady, methodical, just like he'd done with my store's books for all those years. "All liabilities connected to Ms. Whitaker's accounts are now under investigative status," Brandon added. "Her personal exposure is contained as of this timestamp." I'd been holding my breath without realizing it. That was the safety net I'd wanted for Ellen, protection from whatever scheme Eric had cooked up. The relief in her eyes told me I'd done right by my daughter. "Now," I said, nodding to Frank, "let's move to the investor notifications." Frank's fingers tapped his tablet, launching the time-stamped evidence package to a carefully prepared list of Eric's investors, the same documents, the same proof, spreading like wildfire through the business community Eric had bragged about commanding. The replies started almost immediately. Frank's tablet pinged softly, once, twice, then a steady stream. He read each, one aloud, his accountant's voice making them sound like entries in a ledger. "Receipt confirmed, legal reviewing. Documentation received, all funding suspended. Evidence package logged, counsel notified." Each response was another crack in Eric's facade. He wasn't smirking anymore. He was sweating, tugging at his collar like it was strangling him. Reminds me of the time I caught a kid trying to return stolen tools. Same desperate look, same realization that clever talk wouldn't fix things. "I need to make some calls," Eric started, pushing back from the table. His chair scraped against the hardwood, a harsh sound in the tense quiet. "Sit down," I said, not loud but firm. "Any communication goes through proper channels now. That means compliance and legal counsel only." "This is ridiculous." He slammed his palm on the table, making the water glasses jump. "You don't understand my vision, the complexity of modern real estate. I'm a genius at leveraging forged signatures." Ellen's voice cracked like a whip, first words she'd spoken since the evidence came out. "That's my girl. Might take her time seeing truth, but once she did, she was steel all the way through." I closed the first packet deliberately, smoothing the manila envelope with one hand. My palm rested on the white tablecloth, same spot where Eric's water had splashed me that night. Funny how things come full circle. Frank's tablet pinged again. Through the dining room window, car lights swept across the front lawn, then the sound of car doors closing. Footsteps crunched on the walkway. heading for our door. Eric's eyes darted toward the hallway. He knew, same as I did, that his paper empire was about to face its next test. Some reckonings come with signatures and bank holds. Others come wearing suits and carrying briefcases. The doorbell chimed, but before anyone could move, phones started buzzing across the room like angry hornets. I'd seen plenty of businesses collapse in my time, supply chains breaking, credit lines freezing, but watching an empire crumble in real time through text messages, that was something new. Eric's phone lit up first. He stared at it like it was a snake about to strike, then another buzz, and another. His fingers trembled as he swiped through messages, each one making him sink lower in his chair. Effective immediately. All funding arrangements terminated, Frank read from his tablet, keeping his accountant's steady tone. Full withdrawal from projects A through D pending legal review. Ellen's phone buzzed next. She glanced at me before reading, and I nodded. Her voice gained strength with each word. Ms. Whitaker's signature authority is hereby validated as compromised on specified documents. Her personal liability is formally disputed and segregated. You ever watch someone try to hold onto sand? The tighter they grip, the faster it slips away. That's what Eric's face showed as his precious contacts abandoned ship one by one. 2 more messages hit hard. Institutional investors demanding immediate restitution, the kind of people who don't ask twice. Frank logged each one, methodically, like he used to track inventory discrepancies in my store's books. There's more, Frank said, adjusting his reading glasses. The investor group has drafted a notice. Would you like me to read it, Walter? Please do. I kept my eyes on Eric. Wanted to see every twitch as his reputation dissolved. Notice to all members of the Regional Development Association, Frank began. This serves as formal advisory regarding Eric Matthews' involvement in documented irregularities. The notice went on, clinical and devastating. Every credential Eric had bragged about, every connection he'd leveraged, systematically stripped away. Frank confirmed transmission to the professional networks where Eric had strutted and boasted, the same circles where he'd dismissed me as a washed-up old man. Ellen's shoulders started shaking. For a moment, I thought she was crying, until I saw her face. Relief. Pure relief as her name was officially cleared. My daughter wouldn't carry his debt or wear his shame. Worth every minute of planning. Just for that. Remain seated, I said, as Eric shifted again. We're waiting on final confirmations. My wife Margaret exhaled slowly beside me. First real breath she'd taken since this started. Made me think of quiet Sunday mornings at the store after the rush died down and the books balanced clean. The grandfather clock in the corner, wedding gift from Margaret's father, kept its steady beat. Tick, 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 same rhythm it had counted through 49 years of our marriage. Some things stay reliable if you treat them right. I gathered the last set of documents, sliding them into an envelope marked Legal Counsel. The paper whispered against the manila, loud in the strange quiet that had fallen over the room. Eric's phone had stopped buzzing. No more messages needed. The collapse was complete. Outside, voices murmured on the front walk, professional tones discussing section numbers and jurisdictions. The sound carried through our windows, nature's own PA system, broadcasting Eric's downfall to the neighborhood he'd tried to rule. I picked up my water glass, crystal clear and half full. Remembered that first dinner, Eric's laughter when he'd splashed me. The sound of that laugh had echoed in my head for weeks, driving me to dig deeper, push harder, find the truth. Now I held the glass steady, watching Eric's reflection fragment in the facets. His shoulders had lost their swagger. His smirk had vanished like morning dew. The man who'd thought himself untouchable sat silent, undone by the same attention to detail he'd mocked. The time had come, not for theatrics or gloating. I'd learned long ago that real power moves quietly. Just a simple, calm statement to answer that long-ago laugh. I set my glass down precisely on its coaster, aligned the envelope's edges, and looked Eric straight in the eye. I stood, sliding the evidence packets aside with a craftsman's precision. My fingers found the water glass, the same crystal pattern we'd used at every family dinner since Ellen was a child. Amazing how something so elegant could carry both pride and pain, depending on whose hand held it. "Dad?" Ellen's voice wavered as she clutched her phone. "The bank just sent... They're saying all the accounts are frozen, and there's a formal notice about my name. They're clearing me of everything." I nodded slowly. "Read it out loud, sweetheart." Let's make sure everyone hears exactly what it says. Her voice grew steadier with each word. This notice confirms that Ellen Matthews' personal liability in referenced accounts is hereby suspended pending investigation. Initial review indicates unauthorized use of signature authority. All associated credit obligations are frozen effective immediately. Remember how summer storms clear the air? That's what truth does to a room. You could feel the weight lifting from Ellen's shoulders, see the clarity washing back into her eyes. My girl was free of his web. Eric's phone lay silent now. No more investor calls, no more desperate texts. His empire had crumbled in less than an hour. The Regional Development Association's notice would be hitting every inbox in his professional circle by morning. He'd built his reputation on swagger and other people's trust. Both gone now, washed away like footprints in the tide. I lifted the water glass, letting the light catch its edges. Same weight as that night when Eric thought splashing me would prove his power. Same crystal, different lesson. Without a word, I set it precisely on its coaster, making sure the base aligned perfectly with the wood grain below. From the sideboard, I took a fresh linen napkin, crisp, white, folded in neat quarters, just like I'd taught Ellen to do for special occasions. You can tell a lot about a person by how they treat the small dignities in life. The room went still as I wiped the table slowly, methodically. Every eye followed my hand as it erased watermarks and fingerprints, letting the oak's natural shine come through. 49 years of marriage taught me some arguments are won without a single word. Sometimes you just need to show people what restoration looks like. The soft cotton whispered against the wood, each stroke deliberate, like closing up the hardware store every night, checking the register, straightening the displays, making sure everything stood ready for tomorrow. Good habits outlast bad intentions every time. When the table gleamed clean, I refolded the linen with the same care I'd used to count out change for customers. Precise corners, smooth edges, everything in its place. The way my father taught me, the way I taught my children. Some lessons run deeper than blood. Eric hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. His reflection in the polished wood showed a man stripped of pretense. No more swagger, no more smirks, no more treating earned respect like a joke. Amazing what truth can do to a man's posture. I straightened up, squaring my shoulders the way I did every morning before unlocking the store. 75 years had taught me that dignity doesn't need volume to make its point. I looked Eric straight in the eye, held his gaze until he had to drop his. Then I turned to my family. My wife of 49 years, my daughter with her mother's strength, even Frank, who'd proved friendship doesn't retire. The quiet in the room carried more weight than any shout could bear. I let it stretch, let it settle, let it speak of patience rewarded and principles preserved. When I finally broke that silence, my voice carried the same steady tone I'd used to close 1,000 honest deals. Respect isn't given, it's earned, and I earned mine.